This is the 27 Degrees Technical Empowerment Series, brought to you by SADA's Office of the CTO.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this installment of the Technical Empowerment Series. Today, we have a special episode where we are finally in person, and we are hosting Savannah Goodman, who is the Technical Program Manager for Software and Data Solutions for Climate here at Google. So, hey, Savannah, nice to see you in person.
Hello, great to see you too.
So we just want to kick it off a little bit and just sort of get to know you. So if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and, your personal journey, what you're interested in and what you're working on and sort of how you got to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. As Brian mentioned, I'm a technical program manager on Google's climate team. I lead our overall data and software solution development work. And basically the goal of our team is to help Google achieve our 24/7 carbon-free energy and net zero goals, which I'll get into more specifically later. And specifically, we develop solutions that enable Google to achieve those goals, but also enable others to follow on. That's really important part for us to consider success. The reason why we want others to follow as a key success is because we think that's the biggest way to make an impact to truly decarbonize the grid and the broader economy. And how I got into this space, to start, I'm a really big energy nerd, and I have been one for a really long time. My journey actually goes back to freshman year of high school, where I was fortunate enough to participate in a club called Green School Initiative. So you can tell I was super cool in high school. And one of our first projects was actually to develop a biodiesel lab, where we would take the waste vegetable oil from our cafeteria, create biodiesel, and then run the concession stand at our football games from the renewable fuel. And so it was kind of a circular economy, renewable energy type situation. So since then, I knew I wanted to work on sustainability and in clean energy, so that's what I studied in school. After I went to school, I worked at Tesla as a product manager, working on microgrids, renewable integration, electricity market participation, and whatnot. Then I went to a startup where I was leading our modeling and product teams to develop virtual power plant software, so also very wonky, very nerdy. Now I wanted to make a bigger impact, and I ended up at Google, and I think it's been really exciting to see the sort of influence and impact that Google can have, not just through mitigating our own carbon footprint, but again, going back to that kind of coalition building and solutions development that enables others to follow.
Yeah, and I mean, if you want to have impact at a broader scale, I mean, Google's one of the places that has, the biggest scale of anything in the technology sector. So that's definitely a good place to be. So taking a step back, just out of curiosity, and this is more just kind of a getting to know you sort of question before we get into some of the more Google specific things, but it seems like a lot of the things that you did were focusing around energy and circular economy, but I'm curious, just what other aspects of sustainability are important to you? Some of the other things about the circular economy, like what's sort of top of mind when you think about these kind of things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think energy is really at the foundation of a lot of it. I think if you look at kind of the breakdown of emissions and where they come from, like that root source, energy and electricity are super significant. And so if we think about broader themes that are important to climate change, it's really about, first, like optimizing energy operations, energy efficiency. And now we're in this point, like I feel like that was a lot of the last couple of decades. It's like getting down to a minimum energy consumption. Now we're talking about energy transition, which is like, okay, we're as efficient as we can be, but we still obviously have to rely on electricity. How do we transition that to clean energy? And then I think how that's going to even get more complex in the future is how do we now look at not just the electricity we're consuming, but the supply chain to get there and all the upstream emissions, right, that are kind of, very complicated and come out in different ways. So there's a lot of really, interesting, it's a very interesting journey to see where the world in energy and climate has kind of gone and where it's going.
Yeah. And just something caught my ear on the previous answer you're talking about when you were saying that you took the oil from cafeteria and trying to power the food trucks. Is that, just for my own edification, when we fly and the airlines are talking about sustainable aviation fuel, I know powering a food truck's not the same thing as powering a plane, but is that kind of the same idea, or is it something completely different? Am I off base
I'm not
here?
an expert on sustainable air fuel, so I can't talk much to it. But the idea, right, of generating, they're generating clean or fuels from kind of existing resources that would have emitted carbon anyways, right, is kind of the idea. Or finding ways that emit less carbon, is also considered sustainable, even though it may not be fully carbon free. Like carbon reduction is still just important.
Right. So in the technology space in general, if we're going to take a higher level 10,000-foot view across the landscape of not only cloud vendors, but just technology across the board, if you were to think back for the last 5-10 years or so, what are some of the key themes and the key trends that you've been seeing?
Yeah, so kind of going back to something that I mentioned, Google especially has been working on an energy efficiency journey for a very long time. And that's, I think, something that the compute industry has been really focused on, right, is having those really efficient PUEs, basically.
And sorry, just for the listener, a PUE is
Power usage effectiveness.
Gotcha.
So it's basically an efficiency metric that's kind of specific to the compute industry. And that was sort of one of the driving metrics, right, for being very competitive, being more sustainable, being more cost effective. And I think that's where we're kind of seeing that, again, transition from energy efficiency to actually, okay, now what's powering your data center? And going from not just renewable energy, but carbon-free energy is another trend we're seeing. And that's something, I think Google has done a good job in spearheading of, we need a diverse portfolio of, carbon-free resources on the grid. Some of them are going to be wind and solar. Some of them might be new technologies like battery storage or geothermal. And it's important that we really open up kind of the gamut to full carbon-free if we want to reduce carbon emissions in time. And so I think that's something that a lot of data center companies are starting to look at more and more is how can I really, decarbonize my electricity operations fully?
Gotcha.
Every hour, every location.
Right. So, I mean, you're touching upon some of the things that Google is doing in the broader space of energy and data centers. And I guess, as SADA, we have to ask this question because we are a Google Cloud specific partner. So if you could talk a little bit more about the details around what this means for consumers of Google products, as well as for people who are using GCP, Google Cloud Platform, like how does this translate into something that they can see and that's something that's tangible for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Google has this goal. I guess maybe I can take this time now to define what 24/7 carbon-free energy means. And basically what it means is that we are matching our electricity consumption every single region we operate. So every region we have a data center, every cloud region, and every hour of every day with clean energy. And so that means that if you're a customer of Google Cloud and you're running a workload, and that goal is by 2030. So if you're running a workload by 2030, right, the goal is that workload will be basically running in a data center that's operating on, carbon-free electricity. And so we're, doing that through a couple different ways. We're procuring clean electricity through virtual PPAs. We're also working on efforts to, increase the carbon-free electricity that's already on the grid. And so the combination of those two things are basically what's powering the data center, and the data center is where your workloads run.
Right.
And so the goal is to enable customers to have carbon-free, basically, at least from an operational standpoint, workloads. But there's things in the meantime until 2030 that customers can do, right, to help reduce those emissions until we reach our 2030 goal.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I know this is good to know, especially because I know that a lot of even back when I used to work at Google, and especially now as a Google partner, when I've always been talking to customers, I've also noticed over time a lot of the questions I would get, a lot of the things we'd have to answer in requests for proposals and requests for information we start to see more and more questions around sustainability and what are you doing in this space? And I think it's been interesting to me to see the gradual shift in mind share that's been going on, and it's just more and more people are paying attention to it. So I know you as Google can't say anything about it, but I can say that across the different cloud vendors, I think that Google's doing the most out of the three different ones, and so that's what I always like to talk to customers about. So that's a very good thing. But when you're talking about the 2030 goals, uh, even with the resources and the staff and the power that Google has as a company, that kind of challenge is not without there's going to be things that you're going to run into. There's going to be challenges that arrive. And so, what are some of the things that you and Google have been seeing in this journey to get there by 2030?
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, it's absolutely full of challenges. It's somewhat of a moonshot goal still, and I think the whole kind of theory behind 24/7 is, coming together with different stakeholders, different organizations to actually make it happen. And so, just to outline some of those challenges, and then I can go through some of the ways we're trying to tackle those challenges with partners, right? That's a big thing, is partnerships. So first of all, at Google, obviously data, having the right data, having access to it, having it standardized, having the right tools, right, to drive insights. That's where we think we can actually help a lot and add a lot of value, given our work on Google Cloud, and we're a data company basically. Yeah. There's also a need to kind of send the right market signals, saying, hey, like we, electricity from our utility providers, right, from our retailers, we want clean energy, right? And so it's coming together, sharing that voice right across with clean energy buyers, sharing that kind of demand for clean energy, just making it, making that known, right, is a challenge in itself. Yeah. There's regulatory constraints, right? That's always a reality. Different energy markets, the electricity markets are super fragmented. So different locations have different rules and different kind of restrictions on what you can and can't do.
And even different countries and different,
within the US, even there's like many different regions, and it can be very different whether you're in Florida or whether you're in Massachusetts, of like your ability to procure clean energy. And so, that's a big challenge. And then I think on some of the areas that we're kind of trying to address those challenges. So one, we're doing transactions. We're signing long-term power purchase agreements, and we're also finding ways to make that more scalable, not just for ourselves, but for others who want to join on the 24/7 journey. So we've worked with partners who kind of offer like a portfolio PPA instead of an individual project PPA. And that can be really helpful for having a full kind of scaled model.
PPA again is?
Power purchase agreement.
Gotcha.
Sorry. Yeah, call me out on the wonky energy wonk terms, please.
It's all good.
Another kind of core part of our strategy is investing in new technologies and diversifying our portfolio beyond wind and solar. And so working and partnering with companies who are starting to create scalable and commercial solutions for hydrogen or geothermal or battery storage. And then finally, policy and advocacy is a huge part of it, working with governments, working with regulators, standard bodies to like unlock these barriers in these, more challenging markets, and to also create the right incentives, for example, through the greenhouse gas protocol of incentivizing all these companies to reduce, to really get to 24/7 carbon-free energy. And then underpinning all of that, right, are data and software solutions, because you basically need data and software to drive insights, understand your baseline, plan and forecast for your portfolio, and actually like manage and execute, all the clean energy that you end up procuring.
So the data aspect of it is interesting, because I think that's one way that it can translate directly to a customer of Google, something that's sort of that, because while the clean energy part of it is definitely important, as a consumer of a Google product, it seems sort of more abstract, right? Like there's this, especially because I can't see a data center, the customers can't see the data center, so it's a little bit hard to conceptualize. But the data part of that is something that is tangible, right? So there's products that are coming out, I know, that are already out in the market for us to be able to analyze it. So could you talk a little bit about those products and how we might be able to leverage that?
Yeah. So Google Cloud has a suite called Carbon Sense, and it includes a couple of different products across cloud and workspace. So there's a carbon footprint product, which is actually enabling customers to understand their what we call Scope 3 emissions associated with using Google Cloud. So that's, exactly what you're talking about, taking the emissions from Google Cloud's data centers and apportioning them to specific customer workloads so that they can understand what their own kind of footprint and impact is, and therefore, start to find ways to reduce that footprint. And I think, the transparency is super important, right? I think that's kind of step one, is providing the data to customers so they can understand and measure, right, and track their own emissions over time. I think what's really exciting is we're starting to work on some other features as well that are that more active kind of recommendations for customers to reduce their footprint. So a couple of different examples would include the region picker, the Google Cloud region picker,
Right.
that helps customers choose regions and based it on their carbon content, and also comparing against other metrics that developers might care about, like price, latency, these kind of things. And actually, choosing the location is one of the most impactful things that developers can think about, because going from certain regions, even within the US, can really have a big impact on your carbon
Right.
footprint. And then another kind of new feature that's been launched related to the region picker is a low carbon mode, which is basically an organizational policy that restricts the regions you can select based on what their carbon content is. So if you only allow folks in your organization to choose low carbon regions, that's the only ones that are going to be available within their within the cloud instance. And then there's some actually more features that within our Active Assist kind of product, which is basically recommendations that have to do with if you have an idle project that's just sitting, running, it's costing you money, it's causing carbon emissions. It's like, hey, probably you need to do something with this project,
Yeah.
and you can save. It estimates how many emissions you could save. So those are just some examples, right, of how we're taking a lot of this data that we're collecting for our own carbon footprint and helping bring that transparency to customers so they can understand what the impact is of their own usage, and then take actions, right, to actually go and reduce it.
So and I know you can't talk about individual customers, but with the customer interactions that you've seen, just generally aggregate speaking, like what's the reception been, and like have I'm just curious about what the feedback tends to be, and what people are actually doing with it.
Yeah, no, it's been really positive. I think customers are really excited to have the level of granularity that we're giving them, because we are enabling customers to see on a per product, per service, per project, per region basis, and so they can really slice and dice the data and analyze it. I think they're really excited. We've recently sort of rolled out scope 1 and 3 in preview. Before, we only had scope 2, so it's really the full footprint. And I think customers are really excited about that, because now they can take this data and put it into their own carbon reporting, and they know that it's a more accurate method than they've had to use in the past, where they use super high level kind of top down estimates. And so I think there's the excitement about the granularity and improvement on the data itself. And I think, the recommendations piece, customers are really excited to have the tools, right? It's one thing to show them their footprint, but it's another to give them the tools to reduce it. So overall, we've seen really positive feedback, and I think we've seen quite a bit of uptake, from our customers, and we hope that will continue.
Yeah, and my favorite part, of course, is the fact that all that goes into BigQuery, because I've always been a BigQuery nerd from day one, and so anything that goes into BigQuery is fine by me. So that's good. So this has all been good information, and it's very important that not only Google does this, but it's actually important that, in my opinion, that the entire tech sector does this, right? Because as influential as Google is, like, there is a whole industry and a whole segment that we're all kind of part of this, right? Like, we're all in this together, and because of that, there's so many different angles, and there's a lot of bits of information that you just kind of gave, not only me but the viewers as well, all at once. So I'm just kind of curious, in your opinion, if someone were to listen to all this and take away just one thing or one place to start, where should I go? Where should the person go to start off with?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I know it's a bit overwhelming, but I think, what I mentioned, the biggest impact that you can make is the location that you run your workloads in, because of the difference in electricity emissions factors. And so I think if I were to say, pick one place to start, is probably the region picker. I think it's a pretty, easy tool to use. It makes it very obvious which regions are low carbon, and as long as your workload, can run in those regions, there's no reason to not start,
Right.
doing that today. Of course, from there, we have data which shows the carbon-free energy percentage of each region. And so if you're just trying to get more literate, right, on carbon and carbon-free energy, that's a good place to start, is even in the cloud docs. And I think you'll be surprised to see how different the regions can actually be in
Yeah.
terms of their carbon emissions intensity.
Yeah, and it's also interesting just to see, like, if I have a architecture that's deployed already, I can see what I'm currently, what my footprint is, and then start to see like, oh, well, if I could do this in a different region, and I still have the same, same response rates or same SLAs, yeah, then why not do it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, especially regions. It's not always, some regions are geographically close to each other and still can be very different in carbon content.
Huh.
And I think that also surprises people. Like different countries, it's a lot of it, is tied to the regulatory environment and whatnot, not just the resources that are available there. And so because of that, it's really important that even, in the west coast of the U.S., right, there can be very different carbon footprint depending on which, cloud region you would choose.
Right. I'm gonna pull back from the Google specific stuff for a second, but I mean but when you look at the technology landscape, I guess for the next, I asked you earlier if you could look back for the last 5-10 years, but looking forward in the next 5 to 10 years, what are some of the things that you see as emerging trends? And I guess there's also a little bit of aspect of, I think, if you go on Twitter, you go into the discussion forums and stuff like that, there's a little bit of like climate doomism where people are saying like, oh no, like we're in trouble, we're never gonna get out of this. But what do you see that's happening in the broader landscape that you think is going to be top of mind for people, that gives you hope, that makes you a little bit more optimistic that we're going to be able to solve this?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I think I've been in the space a long time, so it's very easy to get, cynical and doom and gloom. But
You
at
just
the
go on
same
Twitter and you doom scroll and you're like, oh no.
yeah, that's why, try and avoid that. But what's so exciting, I mean, there's just so much momentum right now, like even the ESG space within corporate accounting, right? Corporate accounting, that sounds so boring, but it's getting this whole like new vibrancy around it because of the ESG, the environmental reporting aspect of it. And so I think there's a lot of optimism to be had because of the amount of like collective action that's happening. Like we're seeing corporates making these, not just Google, right? Stepping up, making really big 24/7 pledges, making really big net zero pledges. And corporates have they have large carbon footprints. So even if they just decarbonize their own footprint, that's big. And then secondly, again, it's there's this movement, there's this feeling of coalition. And so if all of these corporates can come together and really get to 24/7 and net zero, the impact there is substantial. And I think we're starting to see a lot of excitement, not just from the large tech companies, but from other, companies who care about sustainability. That's part of their brand or part of their mission. And so I think, I don't know. I think I think the best is ahead of us. That's what my director always says. And it's hard. It's going to be challenging to solve a lot of these problems. But I think as long as we can improve carbon literacy, which is happening, right? Like just getting carbon emissions as like a normal part of conversation, having everyone understand what it really means and what the levers are would be huge. Again, corporate action is important. And then I think it's going to be really interesting to see how we engage within these very local markets. So certain, areas are very progressive. They already have strong, incentives and whatnot, and other regions are behind. But I think if we can collectively come together, right, and go focus on those regions, especially areas that don't have as well established electricity grids, can we leapfrog, right, to carbon-free electricity from the beginning? I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, and the literacy part of that's especially important because it's hard to solve a problem if you're not able to define it, it's hard to solve it.
Yeah, and carbon is this like weird, CO2, right? It's like a transparent gas in the atmosphere. Like, what does it really mean? And there's a lot of uncertainty in the modeling, and so there's so much nuance. But being able to communicate, right, in an effective and clear way, I think is also going to be a big part of the next decade for our regulators, for our corporates, whoever's kind of taking action, finding a way to, meet it, bring this information to the masses.
Gotcha. Last question, because you've had a story journey in the energy space. Looking back at your own personal journey, what's something that you wish someone had told you when you started that you sort of learned over time, and maybe something that you might be able to tell someone who's listening who's just starting their journey, just a little piece of advice? Like what would that be?
Yeah, I think one thing, and even thinking about what we just talked about, was it's really easy to get overwhelmed, whether it's doom and gloom or because you realize how massive the space is, right? There's so many ways that you can get involved with climate or sustainability. But I think what I would advise is like find the one area you're really passionate about, whether it's electricity transition or even more specific, microgrids within that. Just an example, like go all in on it, because we need people who have expertise in really, deep expertise in all of these areas. And of course, we need people who have breadth and kind of cover the full gamut. But I think one thing when I was going through it, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much. I need to read everything. I need to know everything. And you just can't. You won't know everything. And so if you find an area you're passionate about and focus on it and really figure out where are the levers that I can really make an impact, I think you'll feel less overwhelmed and you'll actually be able to realize, that impact without sort of trying to, you don't want to boil the ocean. We all have to come into this together. And so there's, that willingness to kind of let go of like trying to solve the whole problem all at once.
Gotcha. It sounds like that the answer may have sort of overlapped a little bit, but I did want to give you the last word because that is all the time that we have. But if there's one thing that you want to leave the viewers with, what would that be?
Yeah, join us. Join the journey. I think that's like, as you can probably see, I'm super passionate about this topic. And I think a lot of the folks on my team are, and there's people at all of our partner organizations who are just as excited. And I think we really need, people to participate and be part of the conversation and figure out how every industry, can decarbonize, not just the cloud industry. And I think there's a lot of learnings that can be shared across sectors. And so, the aggregation, of these behavior change is what we need to really make a big impact. So join the journey.
Cool. Cool. Well, again, that is all the time that we have for today's session. For the viewers out there, definitely thank you for your time and appreciate you tuning in to hear us talk about energy and Google Cloud. If you do have a second, please like and subscribe to the channel as well. And if you do want to join the conversation, please drop a comment right below. Cool. Well, Savannah, thank you for the time. Definitely appreciate it. And thank you for hosting us in the offices here. It was definitely fun.
Yes. Thank you so much, Brian.